Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special meeting, Finance Committee Workshop, Budget Workshop number 2. My name is Amy Wiltsey, Finance Committee Chair, and today is February 8th. I now call this meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. On tonight's agenda, and I apologize for some of our latecomers. There seems to be some issues on our highways, so bear with us as we become a full team pretty soon. On our agenda tonight, we have our itemized estimate of expenditures for the review of salaries and benefits, as well as a review of curriculum budget. We will get started with Ms. Mangini and our review of salaries and benefits, please.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed some of this warmth today. I ran out for a short while around 4 o'clock and it was beautiful.
Nice day.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We're really happy to have this opportunity this evening to review the superintendent's budget request for fiscal year 24. And we will be doing it by category, similar to the process that we used last year. And over the next few weeks, each area of the budget will be presented, and that will allow you the chance to ask questions for a clear understanding of this financial plan. Once again, we do ask that you email us questions in advance. We did receive quite a few that we're hoping to respond to by tomorrow. We're working on gathering all that info. And we will keep a running list through the superintendent's office so that we're sharing information with all members of the Finance Committee, so you all receive the same information. To begin this evening, we're going to review the salaries and benefit areas of the budget, along with the curriculum, teaching and learning budget section as well. The salaries and benefits will be the first area that I will take you through, and then Dr. Gator will take over on the curriculum portion. And if you don't mind, we ask that you just hold your questions till the end of each section. So when I'm done with salaries and benefits, I'll open it up to the questions, and then when Dr. Gator completes her section, she'll open it up as well. As you can see, salaries and benefits make up a significant portion of the district's budget. It's over almost 76%. And actually, we're a little bit lower than the national average of about 80%. And that is reported by the National Center for Education Statistics. NCEA guides school boards, both public and private, very closely when it comes to accounting. So it's the district's largest expense. Let's take a closer look. Staffing includes these new positions that are being recommended by the superintendent, and Dr. Osunde shared information concerning these positions in his presentation on Monday evening. And the new positions do total $462,561. Additionally, the superintendent's budget also supports these new initiative requests, and these do come directly from our building leaders. We've met with all of them during the budget process, and this is a list of some of them that we thought were the most worthwhile out of all of that were requested to support, and probably the most reasonable fiscally as well, totaling $311,236. So salaries fall under the 100 object code, and again, that's in accordance with basic accounting structure through NCES. And the certified salaries are included specifically in object code 111, as you will see in your book. This page is exactly what you have in your budget books, but you can share it to the audience as well. And this area of the budget includes all teaching and administrative employees occupying positions that require State Department of Education certifications. This object code also includes activity and coaching stipends in non-union administrators. In addition, in your books this year, we included an explanation summary of the salary account variances. As you may recall, we had this discussion earlier, there's been a lot of movement between schools with teaching staff. And as a result, there were very significant variances, so we thought it would be easiest to provide those explanations. And one of the examples is the kindergarten and first graders that moved from Soto over to Johnson. Obviously, there's a reduction in the Soto budget and a significant increase in the Johnson budget. Overall, the increase to our certified salaries is slightly over 4%, and this increase is a result of negotiated general wage increases and union step increases. That brings us to non-certified salaries. This area of the budget includes all employees occupying positions that do not require state certifications, such as secretaries, custodians, our classroom instructional aides, IT technicians, etc. The increase for this object code is 7.39%. And again, most of that increase is due, well, I should say much of that increase is due to general wage increases, but most of it is due to the sub account, which you will see here has a significant increase of $410,000. So we're going to take you through the reasoning for that increase. Historically, this account, prior to the pandemic, had been underfunded by $100,000 approximately. And you can see on this slide what the actual costs for fiscal year 17, 18, 19, and 20 were to support that. Of course, fiscal year 21 and 22 truly were not appropriate guides for expenses in this area. Due to the pandemic, we weren't able to fill building sub positions. We weren't able to fill daily sub positions. So we usually had a much lower actual cost in those areas for those 2 years. Of course, this created issues within our buildings, and it continues to, often resulting in additional payments to teachers who cover extra classes. Another reason for the increase in this budget area is the daily sub rate. It's recently been increased for two main reasons. One is to be more competitive with other districts, though quite frankly, even though we've raised it to $125 a day, this is still considerably less than some of our neighboring districts. And also to ensure that we are at least paying the minimum wage for the hours worked by these substitute teachers. As you may know, the minimum wage is going to increase to $15 an hour in June. That's a 35% increase over the last 5 to 6 years, and we truly hadn't been increasing our sub rate at the same rate. So we felt that was very important at this point. Lastly, a portion of the increase is for the per diem premium for a substitute service. We are considering working with a sub service. We've had discussions with our administrators. There's a lot of concern about what's going on in the schools when we can't fill positions with subs and we have to either bring in a teacher for a 6th class or pull in a tutor, whatever has to be done, but it's probably not the best situation. So in speaking to other districts and doing our due diligence and research, we know that there are districts throughout the state struggling with the same problem, as well as nationally, quite frankly. And we really do feel that with a sub-service, we may end up not only seeing an increase in efficiency and fill rates, but also potentially a better quality of subs, only in that they will be provided potentially better benefit packages than we as a school district are able to provide them. And many of them are looking for that. So if they just sub for us for 1 day a week, they may be subbing somewhere else, which will entitle them through that service to get full medical benefits, which is really a plus. It will save us some hard costs in teacher coverage costs, as I said, either 6 classes or also just pulling a teacher at the elementary level. And we've estimated that alone to be about $80,000 for the fiscal year. It will also cover, save us in workers' comp costs, potential unemployment costs, but it'll also provide some soft cost savings that we don't always pay that much attention to, but that they are equally as important. And that could include recruitment, processing, scheduling, and even the management of substitutes. So for a variety of reasons, we think it's worth considering. So that takes us through salaries. Now we're going to take a look at benefits. Benefits include employee health insurance, dental insurance, group life insurance, all that are listed here, along with employer tax liability, unemployment, and other benefits that include custodial clothing allowances, for example, and funding for unused sick leave payouts at retirement. We've been fortunate, as you look at our health insurance line, over the past few years, it's been a real welcome since I arrived here, that we had switched carriers over to Anthem, and as a result had locked into some very reasonable renewal rates. So while many of our counterparts in the state, both schools and towns, are facing double-digit increases for health insurance renewal, we have been pretty consistent, staying around 7%. If you do the math here, you'll see that's not exactly 7%. And the good news is we've actually negotiated a savings through our retirement insurance. Our broker worked with us, and by switching our prescription for our retirees over to Anthem, we have the Anthem medical plan. Now Anthem has both. We estimate that we're saving about $285,000 next year. And while that's a great savings for the district, it will also save money for those retirees who are paying some premium cost share against that as well. So our total increase in this line is $573,371, and at a 2.91% increase overall, it's really quite reasonable when you factor in that our wages alone are higher than that. So we did pretty well in this area, I'm happy to report. So that's a brief overview of both salaries and benefits, and I'm happy to take any questions. I know that there were quite a few questions posed about salaries that we will be sharing info with you tomorrow, but we're happy to address anything that we can.
Mr. Carter?
Pam, are the subs W-2 or 1099?
They are W-2s.
But the subservice would not be our employees?
Correct.
So we would just pay it to the service?
Correct.
Can the subs be 1099s?
No, they cannot. They're our employees.
Although they could refuse the sub-assignment on a day.
Well, can you repeat that, Ben?
Yeah,
I said they, if you call a sub to come in, they can say no. An
According to-
employee can't say no.
I see where you're going, but according to the IRS, there's a much more in-depth comprehensive test than
Well,
that.
I get that, but we start with they can say no.
That would not, believe me, I went through an IRS audit, that would not work. They are W-2, they are our employees.
Sorry, Mr.
Hi,
David.
Madam Chair. Yes, the question I have is, right now, what I've seen in the district for many, many years is we've had a challenge on building coverages for getting substitutes. And I was just wondering, through you, through Courtney, how many open positions, teaching positions that we cannot cover right now with subs? And subsequent to that question, I know we upped it, and I know the district next to us, Milford, pays $140 a day. So, you got to keep up with the Joneses a little bit. And if we're having these open coverages, and this is more of a statement now, I think it causes a systemic problem in our district, where you have, someone's got to cover the classroom, whether it's a classroom teacher, a tutor, a specialist, a coach. You got to get a warm body to watch these kids. And I was just wondering how you can answer that, and maybe the superintendent can jump in as well. So.
With regard to how many vacancies we have in the course of a day, Courtney would certainly have better information than I would, but I think we have administrators here who will certainly tell you how problematic it's been for them. This is my third school year here, and the first two weren't real. The first one was really dealing with COVID and hybrid, and I know how much we struggled. And last year, when we were starting to move back to becoming a little bit more normal, it was still a problem, particularly with building subs. But I do know that right now, you are all still struggling a lot, and I hear it a little bit. I would defer to Courtney. I don't know if you have an average of how many subs we are not able to fill
Yeah.
weekly or daily.
It does depend on the time of year, with illness or, winter is tough sometimes, especially with COVID. I don't have an exact average for overall for the year, but I can get that for you through our system. So I can get back to you with that, but I would venture to say we are never over 60% fill rate.
Over 60% fill rate.
Never over.
Never over 60. So we have open classrooms every day. And I guess to the superintendent or to Linda or somebody, or Dr. Gata, how do we cover now when we don't have a sub in the classroom?
Yeah, I think good evening to everybody. I think Pam and Jenny did touch on that. To the extent possible, we try to flow building subs, but if there are absences, we do lean on our colleagues. So oftentimes you'll find that a teacher will give up a prep period to support another teacher. To contextualize this a little bit, the average annual absences rate for the state is right around 10 days through the year. So it essentially equates to about 1 day a month for a teacher. Typically, we try to stay at that average or less, but ultimately, I think one of the things that it's important to note is that people have sick days, and if they're sick, they're entitled to use those days, right? So they shouldn't have to think twice about it because we're having challenges around substitute vacancies. I do take a look at the attendance every morning, particularly in the winter when I start to think about snow days and Omicron and all of those things. Overall, I would have to give credit to SEA and SAA. People show up to work for our kids, and I think that's undeniable.
No, and I don't dispute that. And through the chair, I really want to ask, and just my opinion, humble opinion, I think if we up the sub rate, I think we can get more subs in there and stop, I'll call it the systemic problems, some of the systemic problems we have in district when we don't have classroom coverage. I think it's inexpensive money when you look at the whole budget. If you're talking, where are we today, 120 a day?
Yeah, 110.
110, so $30 a day for 30 subs a day. Do the math, $900 times so many days. I mean, I think when you look at the overall budget and the problems it causes when we don't have coverage in the classroom, I think it's something to look at. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying today we're going to do a line item or anything, but I think we should look at it from a board, finance board, to the board.
Thank you, Mr. David. Mrs. Cupie?
So follow up to what Mr. David brought up, right? If we've had a number of positions that we haven't been able to fill, so if we had to go above our current rate in order to get subs to manage our, our classrooms, like why aren't we doing that? Like why would we sit on those dollars and not fill the current need that we have while we continue to move around salaries for positions that we haven't filled in months, right, to other line items? I'm just curious if there's any answer there.
I would just say that even currently, within our own pool and at the current rate, we can't find bodies.
Right, so-
We can't
right.
even find them for the
Okay,
building.
so it's not a matter of rate, it's a matter of.
combination. We
Okay.
think the rate
Mhm.
being more attractive and competitive will help, but by expanding it to a service that has access and people signing up throughout maybe the greater New Haven and Fairfield counties, it will expand the pool for us as well.
But again, do you see my point though?
I do.
It's right now the impact of not having somebody to, attend to the classrooms, right? Versus the long term that it's taking to fill some of these more full-time positions. It's why not up the rate right now so that we can address the need and then over time, right? Like we adjust as we move along.
We can certainly have that discussion.
Yeah, I'll echo that. We can certainly have that discussion as a board. We did up the rate. We had this conversation last year. We know that obviously filling vacancies, substitute absences has been a challenge over the last 2.5 years. We did up the rate. We're finding some marginal success, but part of our proposal right now with consideration of a service is long-term, really. The efficiency and around here in the state of Connecticut, the service that's widely known is Kelly Services, which is what I've used in the past as a principal. They take a lot of the middle work out of the way. But to Mr. Davis' point and to Board Member Cupie's point, it's more than just, the conversation gap. There's lost instruction, right? Making sure we have people who are obviously well qualified, delivering instruction, and making sure that kids are engaged. Kelly Services has a solid reputation. We also, myself, Courtney Brown, and Ms. Mangini also examined another service. We've not made a final decision, but we have some estimates and we're making this proposal.
That's great. Mrs. Delphi.
Just as a follow-up to that, I'd like to know a little bit more about, like, a service contract. Is there a prorate to it? Is there, how are they paid out? What is, how does that work? I know how Kelly Services work. I work with them myself, but just curious on how it's set up for the sub.
I wouldn't be able to go into the anatomy of that right now, but we can certainly furnish that to this committee at a later time.
Okay, great.
Of course.
Mr. David.
And just to let this board know, and I think some of the finance people might know, we actually looked at Kelly Services 10, 15 years ago, and it was just cost prohibitive at that time, so.
Ms. Lance.
Do we have a cost? Yes, it's factored in, that 410,000. We're estimating that it could be as high as $150,000 additional cost for next year. And again, it depends on the fill rate, it depends on how many people they actually get. And basically, I don't really want to give out the percentages yet because we're still negotiating. But, there's a percentage.
But as long as we have some, as long as I have some idea.
So if you look at that 410%, it's about 100,000 from being historically underfunded in that account. Coupled with that is the increase to $125 per diem rate, which would probably cost about $160,000, with the balance being our estimate for the additional cost for the service, $150,000.
Thank you.
Okay.
Amy?
Oh, didn't see you, Mr. Proto.
Pam, the teacher salary line for 23-24 is just over 41 million. How much of that 41 million, try to make sure I ask the question correctly.
In the mic, please.
I'm sorry. How much are the positions that are listed in the budget as vacant? What is the accumulated total of those positions?
We are putting that information together, obviously.
I don't remember if I asked that or not.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
And in looking at it today, we have a significant number, but percentage-wise, I don't think it's as high as I actually thought, quite frankly, because we are going through this process. And as you know, Courtney Brown, as our HR director, every month provides the board with that information of vacancies. What has been probably the most challenging this year, and our administrators know way better than I, is that we fill positions and then for whatever reason the person resigns, and then maybe we'll have an internal transfer, and then we have another vacancy. So there's been a lot of movement. So honestly, that is why it's taking us a little bit longer to respond to all of your questions, because we just want to make certain we're giving you not only accurate information, but as comprehensive as possible as well.
And subs don't fill for vacant positions. They only fill positions for a teacher or a staff member who is out that day.
Well, they can for long-term sub positions when we can't fill a position. If we can find somebody with the proper certification, and correct me if I'm wrong, we will. And then, of course, it is at a higher rate.
Mrs. Patel, did you have anything?
I did. I just wanted to make sure there was no more follow-ups to that. You're okay? Okay. I noticed, I'm just switching gears for a second, there are several new proposed positions. I was just wondering why we weren't looking at bringing back some of the positions that are sitting in grants right now, as opposed to adding new positions into the budget. We're about to enter a fiscal cliff, as you talked about the other night, and I feel like we should be looking at those positions a little more to bring them back into the budget before we're adding new.
I think that's a fair point, and I think that's the purpose of this committee is to make that recommendation to the full board. We have extra dollars that expire next year, and my position is open and public about this, that I don't believe it was our wisest moment to make that decision in the past, but nonetheless, the decision was made. It is our responsibility now to be responsive to it. There is discussions that happen across the state and across the country as to whether or not we'll have the opportunity to extend the deadline to spend down the extra dollars. as we think about some of the things we're looking to do from an improvement standpoint for the district, again, some of the foundational things that we've set priorities for, some of the strategic suggestions or proposals that I have made are, in my opinion, positioning us to accelerate the work that we're doing. We currently have those positions that are locked and filled right now, and they're supported by the grant. The idea is that next year, when we have this conversation about the fiscal cliff, collectively, we have to be responsive to it, and that's something that we've been discussing for the last couple of years.
Just a quick follow-up to that. So those positions that are listed that will expire in the grant next year, they're listed in our books.
Mm-hmm.
Those funds are earmarked for next year and can be used for salary next year, or they are done this year?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So are those positions funded next year through that grant
They're
for the
funded
entire
through-
year?
Correct.
They are.
That's been the position for the last couple of years.
Any other questions? Mr. Henry?
So in the security guard SOR reimbursement, who is it we're reimbursing?
The town of Stratford.
And that's for basically police officers?
That's for the school resource officers, correct?
Ms. Corcoran?
Following up Mr. Hendrick's question, has our rate of reimbursement gone up?
Yes, it has. Of course, their salaries go up, their health insurance benefits go
Okay,
up.
so it's just responsive to their
Correct.
contractual increases. Thank you.
Any opposition to
Mr. David?
Yes, on positions, I see that we have one assistant principal at Second Hill Lane. You're asking for an extra assistant principal due to the number of students at the school. I know there's a lot of different programs there as well. Have we looked at all the schools and the populations of the schools and think about, bring up the word redistricting to move students to other schools so we don't have as many students at certain schools as others?
Yeah, so
From a cost standpoint too.
of course, redistricting, in the context of this budget, redistricting is a conversation that's happened at my level. It's also a conversation that's happened at a very surface level through the planning committee. That's part of the work that I'm going to dive into this spring. Right now, what I'm doing is analyzing a series of data points. I also know that Fairfield most recently has been going through that process, so I've had some surface level conversations with my friend who's a superintendent of the district. We are scheduled to have another follow-up conversation after we wrap up our budget process here. We're taking a deeper dive into that analysis. But our position is firm, that if we're going to do this, we need to make sure we do it right, and it takes some time. So we want to make sure we do our due diligence over X amount of months, making sure we have as many people's voices as part of the process, so we have something in place that meets the needs that we have.
Thank you.
But also bigger school buildings have more children and to need more staff. So it's not necessarily, just moving kids around. Like if you have a larger building with a larger population of students, you're going to need more adults to
Far
care
more
for them.
complex.
So, yeah.
Multiple variables moving at the same time.
Where I'm looking at, I'm sorry if I go, where I'm looking at is we have certain schools, I look at Chapel, for instance, which I believe doesn't have as many students as capacity, right? So that's where I was thinking maybe we can make a shift there and not need an additional assistant principal at Second Hill Lane. That's where I was kind of going with the question. But to your point, it's not something we could put together in 60 days before the end of this budget. So
I think that's
well
exactly.
understood.
I think that's exactly my point.
Okay.
There are variables. Family voices have to be involved in this process. Our position or readiness for that level of change, right? Particularly as how it impacts the kids. This is it's a broader study, in my opinion, rather than trying to make a move for September 1.
Fair enough. Thank you.
I would add especially for Stratford. There's quite a history of making very quick redistricting.
As someone who's went through redistricting and put it together in 6 weeks, I'll tell you, I believe you're doing the right thing.
Thank you, Mr.
All day.
Any other questions for Ms. Mangini regarding salaries and benefits?
I have a curious question.
Sure, Ms. Cookie.
So since COVID, when you started, and we've been struggling to fill positions, are there any positions that were never filled since that period of time? Like we just had to move people around, or it just never got filled
To the best of
permanently?
my knowledge, no. There
Okay.
have been some that have been open since the beginning of this school year.
Mhm.
Not that many. Susan Nicholson, Courtney, and I spent some time today looking at that. But I don't believe so. Brittany, you can't recall any other?
No, from 3 years ago?
Well, I'm just saying, throughout this,
Yeah.
period where we've been struggling to fill some of these roles, I was curious because maybe there was a positive story of some reconfiguration or whatever that we did, organizationally. I'm just curious, like I said.
The transiency piece has been a challenge, but particularly for those hard-to-fill roles that fall under the Department of Human Services,
Mhm.
we've contracted services out.
Okay.
Mrs. Lenz?
Can we talk about Title I for a second? I know that some of the schools, I don't know what they are right now, are Title I schools. So some of the teachers are paid by the Board of Ed, and then their supplement, and their additional salary is by Title I. Is that noted anywhere in the budget?
If they are paid a portion by general operating budget, you will see a point whatever by their names. But the majority, I believe, of our teachers, we try to put the entire FTE salary of an individual in the grant, whether it's Title I, IDEA, because it gets really confusing when we're dealing with a 0.4 or a 0.3. So if you see some in there that, and Sue, obviously you have background here.
Right, because I was a Title I teacher, and I
Okay.
knew that part of my salary is paid by the government, but I guess my point I'm trying to make is that if somebody's making, according to the book, $101,000, we're not really paying them 101, we're maybe paying them 80, and the government's paying the rest.
What you're looking at in the back at salaries are all directly expensed to the general operating budget. You do not have anyone in there that's expensed to a grant.
So the money will be coming from the government to pay for part of the salaries of the Title I people, correct?
Yeah, if not all of it, yes.
And where does that money go then?
Those are separate funds, and they're in that grant summary that we provided to you on Monday evening. It doesn't have that kind of detailed breakdown, but it does say X amount for salaries, X amount for benefits, and all the programs that go along with each of those grants.
Okay, I haven't had a chance to look at that
That's
yet.
okay.
so
I know we give you a lot of information.
Thank you.
Mr. Henrik?
So with the desired assistant principal at Second Hill Lane, I know there's like Johnson who has an equal number of students or similar number. But we also have the dual language program over there. We looked at expanding the dual language administrator's responsibilities to encompass some of those that might be taken on by a new vice principal.
No, and the reason why I say that is because the current dual language administrator has responsibilities district-wide.
And then, can we get just a breakdown as far as the scoring levels, what we use to monitor the scoring levels, how the dual language compares to the rest of the students within the districts that, K through 6 or whatever?
From a performance or achievement standpoint?
Yeah.
We can certainly do that, but if you recall, in September, we made a presentation on student achievement, and although a lot of the data we presented, in our opinion, could use some improvement, and our schools are working in that direction. One specific point of highlight and pride was the fact that our dual language students, or second language learners, certainly through the last links, outperformed the state significantly. So this is, when we look at the programs we offer here at Stafford Public Schools, our dual language program is without a doubt one of the marquee programs we have.
And is that a state mandated? I know there's just some discussion whether, is dual language a mandated program because of our percentage of Spanish-speaking students, or is it just an additional program?
Second language support is a mandated program.
But not necessarily the dual language program?
Not necessarily dual language.
Okay. And then at some point, can you get us I know there's some different transportation costs associated with moving those kids over to the Second Hill Lane. Can we get a breakdown of how our transportation costs have been impacted by that move?
There was
There was no.
zero transportation costs. We actually just had our students from Johnson move over, they were housed in Johnson, move over to Second Hill Lane. We'll triple check that for you, but.
So we don't offer transportation?
The dual language
We're already
students
offering
receive transportation, but the buses that pick them up to Johnson now are taking them to Second Hill Lane. So it was a wash, there was no additional costs
We have a fixed contract with Joe.
for X number of buses, and we were able to accommodate that.
Okay.
Mr. David?
Yes, I just have a question. On the curriculum development salaries, I see there was a reduction of 13%, $50,000. Was that 50,000 part of a grant now because we have no salary? We know no positions. I saw the big zero on the presentation. No reductions. So the 50,000, can you tell me about that?
I'm actually going to leave that to Dr. Gita during her presentation. I just want to make sure we're both looking at the same thing.
Page 1.
Yes,
Yep,
yes.
okay. And
That's
I don't want, I'll wait, I'll stay tuned for the next shot. All right, I don't want-
And she'll do a little
All right, I won't go
breakdown.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions for Ms. Mangini, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
We will now ask Dr.
Turn
Gata.
it over to Dr.
Dr. Gata will present our curriculum budget.
Good evening, everyone. Really happy to be here this evening and have an opportunity to talk to you about two pieces of the teaching and learning budget, specifically the curriculum and professional development piece. Okay. So for the Office of Teaching and Learning, we have to remember where our focus is. And Dr. Sunday has alluded to a few pieces that you'll probably hear several times in my comments this evening also. We need to be student-centered, making sure that what we're doing, what we're planning, where we're going is all to try to improve our student achievement performance so that they are successful when they leave us. In addition to that, talent development, providing our staff, whether it's administrators, teachers, support staff, with the skills, not with the skills, but the developing their understanding, knowledge, and skills if necessary, to work with our students to meet the needs that we have for them to be successful. And finally, climate, creating a learning environment that's engaging, inclusive, and equitable for all of our students. So those three areas really are also reflected in documents that you've seen before. Our portrait of the graduate is our North Star. You've heard that expression before. Our strategic operating plan, there are three specific categories that I think are addressed in our conversation this evening. Meaningful learning, well-being not only for students but for staff as well, and the future success for our students. And our Alliance Plan, which is a new resource for us this year in terms of the academic support we're able to provide, talent support, as well as climate. So trying to keep all of this in mind, what I'd like to do is to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about where we are right now and where we hope to go. Okay. So our teaching and learning budget pieces that we're going to talk about tonight are the curriculum piece, as well as professional development. And in our budget book that you have here, you'll see that there are really two lines for professional development. One stated professional development and the other contracted in service. Both providing professional development, new learning for us as a district, but they fall under different categories. So first of all, I'd like to take the curriculum piece. Okay, so our curriculum needs to be the blueprint for where we want our students to head, where we want our teachers to teach, and how we're going to support students and make sure that the curriculum that we have is responsive and customized to the students in Stratford. So within the last year, we adopted a curriculum template, which was really based off of a template that the state released. And what we did was customize that template so that there are sections in there in the template that specifically call out equity, that specifically call out what we're doing for our multilingual students, for our students with exceptionalities, etc., but also our portrait of a graduate attributes, so that when we're looking at a unit for a particular course, how that unit will help to build or provide opportunities for students in developing their own attributes that we as a district have decided we want them to graduate from Stratford Public Schools with. Over the last year, for curriculum revision, we've looked at 7th and 8th grade social studies that have been approved by the board, French and Spanish 1. In the arts, from K through 12, there have been a number of courses and programs that were approved by the board that were brought forth earlier this year. So you can see the secondary courses in advanced art, studio, ceramics, etc., as well as the elementary and middle school piece. So there really was a systemic revision for our arts program. The next thing is neuroscience, the development of the neuroscience course, and biotechnology. So all of those courses were brought forth within the last year, and we're very excited, and they got very positive, and the teachers who worked on this came and talked about it, and they bring their enthusiasm with them. So moving forward for the 23-24 school year, we're hoping these are the following areas that the coordinators have worked on and have thought that they would like to bring forward. So at the elementary level, it would be literacy, primarily early literacy. Mathematics, we could be continuing the review of the math program, specifically with respect to number clusters and adding in other pieces to the curriculum. Social studies, we're waiting for the state to release the social studies standards, and once that happens, then we'll have those in order to complete our look at the social studies at the elementary level. In secondary, looking at English in grade 9, creative writing and visual images, continuing the work in our world language, and adding a special course or program called Heritage Speakers, which really will help us in terms of providing the appropriate next level for our students who have been in the dual language program and who will graduate or move on as biliterate students. And so therefore, we need to look at what's appropriate for them. And most of that focus right now is at the middle level, because we'll have a 6th grade class next year, and then they will the following year move into middle school. So Spanish for Spanish speakers was also the reference that was used by Denise Passari. In addition to that, we're going to continue the mathematics revision, currently looking at Algebra 1, and also looking at school counseling from grades 6 through 12. So those were the recommendations for our curriculum revision review for the following year. And those pieces are part of the proposal that you have in your budget book. As far as professional development, if we think about the opportunities that we have for new learning and opportunities to collaborate with each other and learn from each other, the district, obviously, we have 3 days before students come in at the beginning of the school year. One of those days includes convocation. And we also have election day, which is one full day for professional development.
I'm good.
Okay. And we also have in the spring, now it's scheduled for the end of March this year, a half day where there's an early release day. And we, as a district, engage in most of the building-based professional development on that day. In addition to that, we have our monthly professional learning communities and our faculty and department meetings. We're very appreciative of the support that the board has given for these opportunities for us to get together as a team. And in addition to that, to try to share ideas as we move forward. So these are our opportunities for learning. I also want to say that outside of this time in school, many teachers, many staff members are involved in extra coursework. They're taking lessons online. They're doing an awful lot in terms of new learning for themselves. So I think that although this is, sort of the official time that we have for professional development, there's a lot of professional development that individuals are engaging in outside of school time as well. So I just wanted to recognize that. So I debated whether or not to put all of this up there, but it excites me so much to see what people are involved in. This is what we're doing this year. We have, as you can see, a number of content-related new learning that's been going on. We also have, if you go right up through the Teach Rock and Western Connecticut Professional Day for Music Educators. Most of these are content-related subject areas and new learning. Beyond that, we also have new learning and additional retraining for processes that we need to put in place to make sure that all of our students are receiving the supports that they need. And so we've not only looked at training within, for example, maybe the services department, but also involving other either classroom teachers, maybe support staff in some of these processes as well, so that they can be available to help students be successful. Oh, by the way, the first picture that's up at the top was taken this afternoon. This is one of our SOAR meetings that we have a staff that's been, this is the 4th meeting, I think, out of 5 that the state is putting on for the science of reading. So I just wanted to make that aware, make you aware of that. But there's also, we have people who are involved, some teachers who are involved in our purposeful play activity as well. In addition, we also have a number of new learning activities that are taking place as well. Most of these are systemic, but they've been, and different people are involved in this. So if you look at something like CT SEDS, right, that's something that involves the 504 individuals, those in pupil services, as well as counseling and other individuals in the school. So depending upon who is involved or impacted by some of the training, it may involve individuals from various departments and positions. So I just wanted us to be aware of all of the work that's going on, all of the efforts, the focuses that we have said at the beginning of the year are going to be necessary for us to continue to support our teachers and our students. So moving forward, as far as the budget that you have for at least this part of the teaching and learning budget, at the elementary level, we're looking to continue our literacy and math assessment work, our social studies work, which I mentioned before, the science, purposeful play, and the science of reading. At the secondary level, continued Open SIAD and NGSS. I'd like to point out that Open SIAD is, an open source program, so we save some funding there, but it's the training that is, or the professional development that is the cost for this, but once that takes place, then we will be in good shape, and I think we're nearing the end of that, if I'm not mistaken. I think this might be one of our last years, but then you have, if we have new individuals who come into the district, it's always important to make sure that they're getting informed and they learn about the processes that we have as well. At the district level, we have art, music, PE, science, reading, counseling, portrait of a graduate, the SIOP training, which is for individuals, I don't know, can you see that? For individuals who are working with our multilingual students. So that particular training is something that crosses departments. And the Confortube, which is, it's a UConn annual summer session, and our enrichment teacher usually participates in that for ideas. Okay. I also wanted to mention the advanced placement courses. I neglected to comment on that. When we decide, and we've been trying to open up more advanced placement courses, but in order for a teacher to teach that course, then that person has to be trained. Okay, so they train over the summer, give up some time during the summer to do the training to teach the course. Okay, so this is, I think it's on page 131 in your book. Okay, and Mr. David, you had a question.
Yeah, we'll go through your presentation, we'll go.
Well, this is the last part of
I
it.
don't want to do that there. 31? Yep.
130 in the appendix.
Yeah, my question was on, actually it was on page 1 there, but we said it was the $50,000 reduction.
I'm actually,
I had page 1, but it's probably somewhere else as well.
Bob, when you were looking at the 100s for the salaries,
Yep.
that $50,000 reduction actually included a couple of coordinator salaries.
Okay.
So it wasn't really a true representation of the curriculum development reduction.
Okay.
So when you look at page 131, the top 3 lines,
Yep.
as reflected on the screen as well, it does in fact indicate that there's probably approximately $24,000 reduction, net reduction out of those 3 lines that I know Linda can explain. She and I chatted about them.
The actual numbers that I've submitted are numbers that were given to me by the coordinators regarding the hours that they felt were going to be necessary. So that's based on the information I was given.
And I think it's important to remember that when you're doing curriculum development, obviously you do certain sections each and every year, and some that you might do one year but not have to do the next year. So this does fluctuate year to year.
Well, and the other thing too is depending upon, if you're doing, just a tweak, for example, with the social studies, we're looking at adding sections in on indigenous peoples, things like that. So it might not be a major revision. It just might, need a few eyes on it.
Thank you.
She's new to this question. She's laughing.
Dr. Gator?
Yeah.
The first 3,
I'm sorry, real quick. Dr. Gator, would you mind leaving that last slide up just so that
Yeah.
everybody can reference?
I can.
the first 3 lines, the curriculum development, admin, elementary, and secondary, those are salary lines?
Yes.
And are those
Yes, they are.
salaries for individuals who are developing the development programs?
Yes.
And is that in addition, are those individuals also, would they also, Pam, you might answer this, or Dr. Gata, also be included in a teacher salary line? Is this additional funds that teachers would earn?
Yes.
In addition to their salary?
Right.
These are just not employees who, that's all they do?
Right.
Well, yeah, contractually, there is an hourly rate that they get paid to do this.
Right.
And it's after hours, obviously.
For their teacher salary?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, questions for Dr. Veda? Do we go to curriculum? Mrs. Goodell?
Science of reading, we had a presentation on that last couple weeks ago. Is that factored into, is a new program factored into the costs for next year?
No, the programs are not listed in this. This is just professional development.
This is just professional.
Right, and if there would need to be curriculum, right. And there is some money in here for professional development for literacy. Yes.
And I should also mention that when we get to the technology review, we do have a combined account that is for all software, instructional software. So Linda and Matt Rivers will walk you through that.
Great, thank you.
No other questions for Dr. Gata?
I don't have a question for Dr. Gata, but I backtracked to go back to, you're off the hook, I think.
A moment.
Take that under. Sorry, I
Can we give Dr. Gator a round of applause?
Thank you, Dr.
Now you're off the hook.
My apologies, sometimes my wheels turn slowly. So going back to our ESSER funded salaries, that additional 2.62% that like is sitting off to the side. As we look forward to the fiscal cliff, you know, how can we then sort of soften the fall, I guess? Yeah, I mean, what can we do?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons why Pam has been sounding the alarm on this is, and we've struggled with this over the last couple of years, and that's why you'll hear me say on a regular basis that, you know, it probably was not our finest moment, but nonetheless, I think we were contextually responsive at that time to the conditions of what we had. To your point about the 2.62%, that's significant, and we do have to have these conversations. But I think the simplest way to maybe respond to the question as to why there's not been a systematic response to phasing that in or adopting it right back in is simply put, that 2.62 would chew up all of our GWI. Okay, and last year, you know, we made a request for about 5.5. We ended up receiving 3 million, and I think we have to make the same. Conduct the same analysis. If we shifted all of those things based on our historical appropriation, it's absolutely unavoidable that it results in larger than average layoffs.
This year.
Any year.
This year and subsequent years.
I think it's also important to remember that the ESSER funds need to be spent by September 30th of 2024. As a result, if we started to phase in any of these salaries, that would take away from the funding that we need to spend down by that time. We could look to repurpose it, but at this point in time, I don't think that's really going to help us. I think the impact to our taxpayers would be more significant. We know it's coming and we're trying our best to mitigate it. Nevertheless, I think to start phasing things in, and I know some districts have been able to do that, but as you look around statewide, we are probably one of the top maybe 20% that have put as much in salaries in ESSER. So we do have a little bit more of a challenge ahead of us perhaps than some of our counterparts. Nevertheless, as Dr. Sunday said, I know I sound like a broken record, but since the day I walked in and we made this decision, and again, it was for, I think, the right reasons at the time, we knew it would be problematic. So one of the things that we made certain of is that we would have 3 years of those salaries within the ESSER funds so that we could make some thoughtful decisions. And we have been. I mean, we've been trying really hard to come up with some good alternatives as we move forward, but it doesn't look very promising because the positions are needed, our needs grow, and the district needs to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. I'll stand in my bully pulpit for a minute and just say that I hope that people are aware of what's coming down the line and just the impact that it will have for our schools, for our town, for our kids, for our teachers. I mean, it will impact everybody. As you have stated, it wasn't an ideal decision, but it was the decision we had to make at the time. We weren't really presented with any viable options otherwise. And so I hope that there's an awareness, not just in this room, but outside of this room as well, you know, sort of regarding the magnitude of the troubles that lie ahead of us potentially.
Ms. Carol Fabian and then Mrs. Lance.
To kind of piggyback off of what Mrs. Corcoran and Mrs. Padilla touched on, and I completely understand Dr. Sunday and Pam, your points, right? We need to spend that money, the ESSER money is there. I too kind of thought, well, why not start to, right, this is a large amount to have to work back into our budget. Why not consider moving some of these back into the budget, even if it had to increase our ask? For multiple reasons. One, when I look at how many classrooms, department heads, like people in athletics, all of that sitting there. That's a concern. Because I would hate to lose them, and I would hate for those people, I know, right, as you're sitting in a grant that you know is running out. And that scares me that we would lose, or could lose, potentially those people, because they're nervous, you know, and you can understand that. I'm also fearful with knowing, with the science of reading and the mandate coming down, if we have to select a program, that's going to be another huge amount of money that we would have to invest next year. So having that on top of all of these salaries sitting in ESSER, I'm open to that idea of perhaps if we can.
But again, I think the point I was trying to make is if we start doing that, we're going to have more money in ESSER, and then we may potentially not be able to spend all the ESSER funds, which I think in a way does put an additional burden on our taxpayers as well, because we certainly wouldn't want to give money back. We are hoping that our legislators will strongly consider extending the deadline for a year, but we aren't really hearing anything strong.
And I would add to Pam's point, it's, Ms. Carol Faven, to hear you speak, passionately in this context, it's like you're a fly on the wall through our conversations over the last few months. We do know that next year is going to be extremely complex. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so diligent about trying to make sure that what we put down on the table this year is as respectful from a tax burden standpoint to the extent possible, and still position us to be able to run an effective district. To your point, there are variables, whether it's the burn down rate of federal dollars, or whether it's our response to the GWI, or whether it's, to your point, the reading program. There are unfunded mandates that will create a confluence of variables that makes our decision from a few years back a little bit more vivid in terms of how it impacts not just our community from a taxpayer standpoint, but also what that means for our professional community, okay, and what that means for the quality of education we provide our children in our school. There is some level of traction right now around the improvement efforts, and people are working incredibly hard in doing those things. It is undoubtedly, in my opinion, the responsibility of this committee to have these conversations here, make a recommendation to the board that's ultimately adopted, that positions us to get as much as we can accomplish this year if some of the variables that we have to face next year are unavoidable.
Mrs. Lance?
Well, my question, and you may not want to answer these questions. I was not on the board, and I was not on the finance committee when those decisions were made. I would just like a little bit of the history of why decisions were made to take department heads, athletic directors out of the regular budget to make them ESSER funds when we knew we were going to have to put them back in anyway. So could I maybe have a little bit of background?
If I can actually exercise a point of privilege, I would ask that we hold on that question, if I can exercise a point of privilege. And I apologize in advance, but I think what is important is to recognize that we can't turn back the hands of time, okay? What is important is, as Ms. Carol Fabian just mentioned, is we're not in a position to lose those positions, all those positions that you see in national piece. And the reason why I'm saying that so passionately is because all of those positions are essential components and linked explicitly to one or more components of the accountability index, right? The specific improvement needs that we have. So if we're talking about department chairs, science, the literacy subject area, those are all the places we have to improve on as a district, right? So we can't lose those people. I think what is important is that as a community, we have to have conversations, and that's my office with town leaders, that's the board with town leaders, and work collaboratively. And I'm encouraged by the conversations we've had over the last couple of months. I think there's more conversations to be had. I think we're moving in the right direction. But in the interim, because of some of the things that Ms. Carol Fabian cited, I know it weighs on the minds of our administrators who currently sit in that grant. I'm hopeful, and I know many of them have been longtime members of our professional community. I'm I'm hopeful that they have a level of confidence that we're going to continue to work on this so they don't begin to consider other options, because these people are valuable for our kids.
I agree with that part of the conversation.
Mr. David?
Yeah, and I think it's a good timing and a good point. I've had this conversation with everybody up there, and probably about 80% of the people in the room. I think now is the time we need to look at our delivery model, a full 360 on how we deliver education to students, our infrastructure and everything else, with the fiscal cliff now looming, September 24, and do something, and have a plan to do something. We're not going to fix everything in a year or 2 years, but our fiscal plans and everything else, we really, really need to look at our delivery model. I think sooner than later. I'm not saying tomorrow, I'm not saying in this, but it's not going to be addressed in this budget, but we need to do that.
Absolutely.
Mr. Henry?
Yeah, so I know well, historically, over the last number of years, we've averaged about $1 million surplus on most of our budgets, and that's based on the reduced number that the Board of Ed, or that the council has given us. If we had taken a look back in the day at perhaps moving some of these out, and last year the phrase was coined, we found better efficiencies through re-engineering. And that was a great move. You know, I mean, it saved us money, it provided a better educational model for our students. But if we had been doing that years ago, when this ESSER thing started, and if we had, you know, if we asked for a 5% budget, the town council gives us a 2.5% budget, and we have $1 million surplus still, at those points, we could have taken some of those monies and put them into the budget and removed some of the positions from the ESSER funds, and at that point, maybe looking at other ways where we could have delivered a better education, not through hiring people or moving positions into it, but creating better educational models with those dollars instead of putting salaries into those positions. So we've had surpluses over the last, I don't know, 10 years, and that's been based on a number that the council gave us, which was about half of our request, year after year after year. So there's monies there. Again, it's finding better efficiencies, it's re-engineering, it's finding better efficiencies, and it's taking the hard stance that, you know, we need to do this. We can't wait till the last minute, like this reading model that we've come up against a hard wall on. You know, the time was then to start looking at it, and we're pushing it off, and we're talking about hiring new administrators without taking a hard look at, we're gonna have to hit this wall with the reading, which we're hitting now, with the ESSER funds dropping off. You know, it could have been resolved years ago, I think. You know, we say we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, but we should have been at least looking at how we could use that toothpaste more efficiently. And I don't think we've done it, and shame on all of us. But I think it should have been done, and now we're facing a cliff. And we've been talking about the cliff. I've only been here for a year, but we've been talking about the cliff the entire year. So I think we should have been a little more proactive, and hopefully we can find some better efficiencies in that through re-engineering, so the cliff isn't as abrupt as we're hearing.
So I'm just going to start this statement by saying, whenever Mike Henry gives my administration any kind of credit, you know, I'll take it on and run with it. But I also say that, you know, the way the budget works and the appropriations, and I know you and I have had this conversation offline about spend downs, there's been surpluses, but I would say that, you know, the pandemic years have not been the best reflectors. It's not the right measure of that piece. It does not necessarily suggest that when the town appropriates to us whatever they do, whether it's cut in half, 5 to 2% to use your analogy, it does not suggest that they were right. Okay, I think whatever is appropriate to us, we have no choice but to stay under that, because if we run over, there are implications for board members. Okay, there are implications for the town as a whole. It is a human disposition. And I know Pam has given this grocery store analogy. If you tell somebody to go to the grocery store with $20, they're going to do everything they can to stay under. And if they come back with 19, they have $1 extra. At the end of the year, after you've gone through your operating, that's why it's called an operating budget, at the end of the year, you're not necessarily positioned to redirect that into positions at the end of the fiscal year. And any surplus that does sit in the coffers of the board at the end of the fiscal year come June 30th goes back to the town. ultimately, we are advocating to make sure that we have an education reserve fund that I think is another strategic approach to make sure that even though this is going to be a painful landing, it softens it to a certain extent because now we have the ability to utilize those funds in ways that can, as I said, soften the landing. Variables such as the right to read program is unavoidable in state legislation, and it's going to feel like a punch in the back from a financial standpoint, and there's no way to circumvent that. The timing, because of the decision we made a couple of years ago, and the fiscal cliff, is what's going to create a very potent conversation within our community. Okay, and I think it's the board's position, and we've talked about this over the last 6 to 8 months, that we want to engage in conversations, and we've started those conversations with the town. My job here is to work with the town to support the goals that they have around making sure that the tax burden of the community at large is doable. But at the same time, my responsibility, my moral and ethical responsibility is to advocate for the needs of the district for our staff and for our children. I think this budget, this budget at a 3.9 is a development based on those efficiencies that you cited. This is the lowest budget we've had. And truthfully, when you exact or cut out the program enhancements that I'm putting on the table, that number is really a 3.3. So we've done our due diligence across the board. And I think as we, with an eye on the future, most of this conversation has been about the future more than it's been about this year. But with an eye on the future that we know is unavoidable, I think it's going to require town brass, Board of Education brass, administrative brass, assistants, everyone can say how to collaborate with this.
I would just add also to Dr. Sunday's points, because you touched on so many that I already had written down, but also to Mr. Henricks. We can celebrate having surpluses, but these surpluses have come at the hands of chokeholding and restricting our programs and chokeholding our students on spending freezes. Our teachers and our schools haven't been able to spend money. We've had vacancies that we haven't filled. It's not because we underspent, it's because we couldn't spend. So I have full faith in your ability to find more efficiencies, but the reality is there's inflation, and cost of living and operating will only rise, and so does the assistance to our students. That needs to happen. Ms. Coopy.
I'll just add, it's not only at the expense of not filling positions, but it's at the expense of what our children have lost, right? Like, yes, you look at the data and you're saying, oh, we came in under budget X number of years, but what have our children lost as a result of that, right? Because we've had to put spending freeze in place, and yes, maybe it was a little too aggressive, and so, right, so it left extra money, but maybe that's an area we need to evaluate when the recommendations come, so that so much is not being taken away from them and we end up with a surplus. So it's not something to really celebrate. And like Dr. Sunday said, when you're given a number, we do have to make sure we come in below that. And some of the factors are, unpredictable. We can estimate as close as, the information we have can let us, get to. But I don't see that as something to celebrate, honestly. And also, Dr. Sunday has only been here for a short period of time. So when you're saying certain things should have been done years ago, yeah, well, we're positioning ourselves to get those things done. We, have new leadership. Those are the things we're trying to work on, and then we propose a spending plan to achieve it, and then that gets ripped from underneath us. So it's going to take forever if we don't commit to this, support it, and advocate for it.
Mr. Proto.
I'm going to make a comment unrelated to the budget, but related to the Board of Education. Everything that we're talking about right now is a direct result of a one-term limit.
Yes, sir.
The ability for board members to have, assuming the people want them, and that's our democratic process, to have long-term impact on what happens in this school district has literally been, and I'm going to use a word that I know I'm not supposed to, retarded for over 30 years because of a one-term limit. That has to go. Board members need to be able to spend time. And you look at successful school districts in this state, you have members of those boards who have served 10, 15 years. I'm not saying board members should serve that long, but you clearly need more than 4 years. As the old saying goes, it takes a year to figure out where the bathroom is. So this town needs to address that issue, because if not, we're going to continue to fail. And the failings of the board, not reflective of the people who serve, are its inability for the people to serve this town for more than 4 years. If that's what the people want, if they don't want you here, there's a way to get rid of you. It's called an election and you go away. Happens all the time. But that has to change.
Thank you, Mr. Proto. I'm glad you said that on record, because the three of us actually sent the council a letter proposing a change to that, the council and the ordinance. So hopefully somebody is listening and, you know, will take action, because that really is a big factor in moving our district forward.
And I would close that statement by saying that we will not fail. This board will not fail. This district will not fail. Our staff will not fail. And our kids will not fail. We have a lot of work to do. And that's an honest and vulnerable conversation that we have to have. And we're beginning that process. And we'll continue to work in that direction until Stratford Public Schools is one of the best schools in the region.
Thank you, Dr. Sunday. Mrs. Bedell, you still have a question? Were there any other questions or statements? I think that's a fine way to call for a motion to
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Thank you so very much. This meeting is adjourned at 7:46.